He paid her to be his wife. $100,000, 1 year, no blood, no feelings, no complications. That was the deal. She was a broke bartender from Texas, drowning in debt. He was a 300-year-old vampire king who needed a human bride to hold his throne, and he had chosen her. A contract, a performance, a lie they agreed to tell together. Except somewhere between the fake smiles at vampire gatherings and the night he whispered her name like it was the first word he'd spoken in centuries, the lie stopped feeling like one. And that was the most dangerous thing either of them could have done. Because you can write a contract for a marriage. You cannot write one for what happens to your heart. Her name was Aria Bennett, 25 years old, brown hair that never behaved, blue eyes that noticed everything, and a laugh she had learned to keep small, so it wouldn't take up too much space in a world that already felt too tight. She had come to Denver chasing the idea of a fresh start, the kind that sounds possible before the bills arrive. For 2 years she had worked the late shift at Shadow Lounge, a bar tucked into the lower streets of downtown. The music was always too loud, the lighting too dim. The air carried a smell she could never quite name, sweet, metallic, like copper warmed by something that shouldn't be warm. She had told herself it was the cocktail garnishes. She had been wrong about a lot of things. Most nights she came home past 2 in the morning, a Capitol Hill apartment with a rattling heater and peeling walls. She set her tips on the counter and ran the same quiet arithmetic she had memorized by heart. Rent, 3 months behind. Hospital debt, $52,000. Her mother's house in Texas, 30 days from the bank taking it. Her father had died 14 months ago. Lung cancer, swift and merciless. The grief had been enormous. The bills that followed had been worse. She had maxed every credit card, sold everything worth selling, borrowed from everyone willing to lend, and still, the numbers kept winning. Every week she wired what she could home to her mother, Carol, 62 years old, mildly ill, too proud to ask for help, sleeping in the living room now because the bedroom felt too large without Aria's father in it. Aria knew this because her mother had mentioned it once, casually, then changed the subject. It had not left Aria's mind since. There was a photograph taped inside Aria's locker at Shadow Lounge. Her parents on their back porch, her father's arm around her mother's shoulder, both of them squinting into the afternoon sun, laughing at something just off camera, something Aria had said, she believed, though she could no longer remember what. She touched the corner of it sometimes before her shift, not dramatically, just briefly, the way you touch something you're terrified of forgetting. For the first time in her life, Aria understood what it meant to be invisible. Not because no one saw her, but because the weight she carried was so ordinary. Debt, grief, exhaustion. The particular loneliness of being the person who holds everything together while quietly coming apart inside. She never complained, not to her mother, not to her best friend Mia, who worked the same bar and offered unsolicited opinions on everything from Aria's love life to her lunch choices. She simply showed up every night, poured the drinks, counted the tips, did the math, started over. Invisible, steady, slowly breaking. And then, on a Monday night in November, a message arrived. Not from Mia, not from her mother, from a private number she had never seen before. Ms. Bennett, my employer would like to meet with you tonight. Private office, downstairs. Arya stared at the screen. Downstairs. She looked up slowly at the back wall of Shadow Lounge, at the door she had walked past 1,000 times, the one she had always assumed led to storage. It had a keypad on it. It had always had a keypad on it. She had simply never allowed herself to wonder why. Mia appeared at her shoulder, read the screen. That, she said flatly, is how every vampire horror movie begins. She paused. Actually, is your boss even human? Because I've been noticing things. Don't, Arya said. But even as she said it, she thought about the customers whose eyes caught the light wrong, the way certain regulars never ordered food, the smell in the air she had never been able to name. She untied her apron, smoothed her hair, took one breath. $100,000 wouldn't just save her, it would save everything. She didn't know that yet. She only knew that the door was there. The keypad was glowing. And something on the other side of it already knew her name. For 14 months, Arya Bennett had been holding on by the thinnest thread, telling herself she just needed one break, one moment where the world stopped taking and started giving. She was about to get it. She had absolutely no idea what it would cost her. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, you'll want to stay for every second of what comes next. If a stranger offered to erase every debt you had, in exchange for 1 year of pretending to be married, would you sign? Drop a 1 if yes, a 2 if you'd walk away. The door opened to a staircase. Arya had expected a storage room, cardboard boxes maybe, a mop, the ordinary, unglamorous truth behind a keypad she had never questioned. Instead, the stairs descended for what felt like far too long. Smooth black stone under her feet, the air cooling with each step, until the city above her felt like something from another life. And at the bottom, framed by dark iron and misted glass, was a room that had no business existing under a bar in Denver. The underground residence of Lucius Draven was not what the word palace usually promised. No gold fixtures, no chandeliers dripping with crystal, all dark stone and gray leather and long still shadows. Elegant the way a winter forest is elegant, beautiful in a way that made you acutely aware that you were small, and the world was older than you knew. Through a wide glass wall at the far end, the Rocky Mountains sat beneath a bruised night sky, closer than they had any right to be. Lucius was already standing when she entered. He was, she would tell Mia later, composed, every inch of him deliberate, white hair, long and gleaming, pulled loosely back, a charcoal suit that looked both ancient and immaculate, eyes the color of old garnets, and a stillness about him that wasn't calm exactly. It was the stillness of something that had learned, over centuries, to be very careful about what it revealed. He did not greet her. He simply slid a folder across the desk. Arya looked down, her name on the tab, her address, the name of her bank, the exact figure of her debt, down to the last overdue interest charge, printed in clean, dispassionate type. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "How do you have this?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Surveillance magic," Lucius answered, as though that were a perfectly ordinary sentence. "Permitted only for individuals connected to the throne. You were flagged when you began working at Shadow Lounge." "Flagged," she repeated. "You work for me. That makes you adjacent to the throne. It is a protection, not a violation." She stared at him. "It feels like a violation." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not guilt, not quite, but an acknowledgement. "I understand that," he said, "which is why I'm offering you a choice." He explained the curse then, measured and precise, as if reciting something he had rehearsed many times but had never said aloud until now. His father, the vampire war, the trust-bound condition, marry a human before the year's end, remain married for 12 months, or surrender the throne to his older brother Derek, a man Lucius described without emotion, in 3 short words. He would ruin everything. The deal was straightforward. She would live here, attend gatherings as his wife, maintain the performance. At the end of 12 months, the Vampire King would erase every debt and pay her $100,000. Her life returned to her, better than she'd left it. "Do we have to sleep in the same bed?" Arya asked. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. And then Lucius Draven, 300 years old, ruler of the hidden world beneath Denver, laughed, a real one, unexpected and brief, accompanied by the flash of very sharp fangs. "Only," he said, composing himself, "if you're curious about how cold immortality feels." The heat that rose to Arya's face was deeply inconvenient. She called Mia from the hallway, hand pressed flat against the cold stone wall, voice low. "Don't sign it," Mia said immediately. "That is literally the plot of a vampire horror movie." "Mia, my mom is 30 days from losing the house." A long pause. "How sharp are the fangs?" The next morning, Arya signed the contract. When she reached across the desk to pass it back, her fingers grazed the back of Lucius's hand. The cold was unlike anything she had felt before. Not the cold of winter or a stone floor. It was the cold of something that had been this temperature for 300 years, and had long since stopped expecting warmth. She pulled her hand back, said nothing. He said nothing either. But he did not look away. She moved in that afternoon with 2 suitcases, old jeans, her laptop, a phone charger that only worked at certain angles, and a small framed photograph, her parents on the back porch, her father's arm around her mother, both of them laughing at something she could no longer remember. She set it on the nightstand in her room, looked at it for a long moment, then looked around at the dark stone and gray leather and understood, for the first time, exactly how alone she was in this. She had traded one kind of invisible for another. Lucius handed her a leather-bound handbook that evening, Ancient and meticulous, inside their fabricated backstory. They had met at a night party in Aspen 6 months ago, married quietly since, deeply private, rules for public behavior, how to stand beside him, how to hold a glass of synthetic blood without visibly recoiling. "You've planned this very thoroughly," Arya said. "I've had 300 years to think about contingencies." "And in 300 years, there was no one else who could have done this?" The pause before his answer was a fraction too long. "There was no one I was willing to ask." She didn't push, but she filed it away, the way she filed things she couldn't yet explain. The first 3 months were a performance, nothing more. Separate bedrooms, take-out dinners, area eating. Lucius maintaining a convincing impression of eating. Occasional conversations about the logistics of his world. Occasional silences that lasted longer than necessary. She was an actress, he was a king. The stage was underground, and the audience was a vampire society that would dismantle everything if they suspected the truth. She told herself it was fine. She told herself the photograph on the nightstand was enough company. She was wrong about that too. Derek Draven arrived 3 months in, at a vampire gathering in an underground hotel downtown. He entered in a black cloak, wearing a smile that had been engineered to look warm. It managed only to look expensive. His eyes, the same garnet red as Lucius's, were several degrees colder. The gathering smelled of blood mixed with aged wine. Haunting violin music threading through the marble hallways like something searching for a way out. Arya wore a new dress. Lucius stood beside her in regal black, close enough that their arms nearly touched. They moved through the crowd with practiced ease, the Aspen party, the quiet ceremony, finding their rhythm. Arya was, she had to admit, a convincing performer when the stakes were high enough. Derek approached near the end of the evening. He took Arya's hand in greeting and held it slightly too long, slightly too tight. "Humans like you," he said pleasantly, "are typically food, not queens." Arya met his gaze without flinching. "Lucky for me," she said. "Lucius has better taste." Something flickered behind Derek's smile. Not amusement, reassessment. Walking back that night, Lucius said quietly, "He doesn't believe us. He'll keep looking." "Then we'll keep being convincing." He stopped, turned, then went to the kitchen and returned with a glass, deep red inside. He drank without ceremony, and when he set it down, she saw how exhausted he was, the kind of exhausted that sleep couldn't touch. "That's the first time you've done that in front of me," Arya said. "Does it disturb you?" She considered it honestly. "No, it just makes you seem more real." He looked at her for a long moment. "You have a strange way of making things bearable," he said finally, and went to bed. Arya stood in the kitchen alone and felt something she hadn't felt in 14 months. Less alone, they traveled to the Draven family castle 4 months later, a celebration of the vampire-human peace treaty. Derek would be there. Council elders would be watching. Lucius had told her carefully the night before. "We share a room, one bed. Derek will be watching everything. Arya had nodded like this was fine. It was not entirely fine. Eleanor Draven met them at the entrance, 500 years old, silver-haired, red-eyed, wrapped in soft flowing robes the color of winter fog, the kind of warmth about her that came from having lived long enough to stop performing. She took Arya's hands in both of hers. "So you're the one," she said softly, not as a question. Dinner was loaded. Derek mocked Arya about her human lifespan. The second time. Lucius's hand found hers under the table. She didn't pull away. Later, firelight, the shared room, one bed as promised. Lucius stood by the window and said without turning, "If this were real, would you still be here?" "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. He turned. Something in his expression broke open. They held each other beside the fireplace that night. No performance, no audience. Just two people sitting with the weight of their respective loneliness, and the strange, fragile relief of not having to hold it alone. Arya told him about the day her father died, the hospital waiting room, the particular cruelty of fluorescent lighting during grief. Lucius told her about the war that had taken his father 3 centuries ago, and still present in him the way old wounds are. Not as pain exactly, but as a permanent change in the shape of things. "I didn't think I could still feel that kind of loss," he said quietly. "I thought immortality burned it out eventually." "Does it?" "No, it just gives you more time to carry it." Arya reached up and touched the side of his face. He went very still. "You're not carrying it alone right now," she said. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like something he had been afraid of wanting. She felt the pull of his nature beneath it, that ancient restraint tightening before he drew back with visible effort. "I almost," he began. "I know, but you didn't." "You have no idea," he whispered, "what you're awakening." She thought she was beginning to. That same afternoon, she had found an ancient book in the library, tucked behind identical volumes, spine cracked with age, a page marked with a dried black feather. The text was in an old language, but one passage had been translated in a careful, cramped hand in the margin. "If genuine love forms within a contract union between a human and a vampire king, the human's mortality may be affected by the bond. The curse does not distinguish between performance and truth." Arya read it 3 times. She did not tell Lucius. Not yet. The contract had been meant to save her. The feelings had not been part of the arrangement. And now, somewhere between, the firelight and the frost and the way he said her name, like it cost him something. She understood that what was growing between them was real. Real enough to be dangerous. Just when she thought she could trust again, the past returned. Some love stories begin with a choice. This one began with a contract. And what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. Keep watching. The morning after the fireplace was quiet, in the way that only certain mornings are. The kind that feel like a held breath. Arya woke first. The castle room was silver with early light. The fire had gone to ash. Lucius was beside her, not sleeping, because he rarely did, but resting, eyes closed. The perpetual tension in his jaw softened in a way she had never seen. He looked, in that unguarded moment, almost human. She was still thinking about the night before, the things said, the things felt, when she noticed the chandelier. Old iron, ornate, exactly as it had always been, but in the flat morning light she saw it. A small black device, barely visible, mounted where the iron curved inward, angled precisely downward. A red light, blinking. A camera. She said his name quietly. Lucius opened his eyes, followed her gaze. She watched the change move through him, not gradual, immediate, bypassing expression and going straight to the body. He was on his feet before she finished pointing, crossed the room in 2 steps, wrenched the device from the chandelier with a crack of iron. The red light went dark. His hand was shaking. She had never seen his hand shake before. "Derek," he said, one word, quiet as a verdict. The violation settled over the room like a second shadow. Everything said beside the fireplace, the grief shared, the loneliness confessed, the moment when the performance had simply stopped. All of it recorded. "He'll use it," Lucius said. "He'll tell the council the entire marriage was a transaction, that we were paid to perform intimacy, and the footage is proof." "But it wasn't a performance," Arya said. "Not last night." He looked at her, raw, briefly unguarded, in a way she had learned to recognize as the closest thing he had to showing fear. "Let him see it," she said quietly. "He filmed the moment I stopped pretending." They drove home from the castle in near silence. The mountains scrolled past the window, enormous and indifferent. Arya watched them and tried to locate the version of herself that had walked into Shadow Lounge every night for 2 years and told herself she was fine. She could find the outline of that person. She could not find the distance. Something had shifted, the kind that isn't an event but a threshold. You step over it without choosing to, and when you turn around, the ground behind you is simply gone. Back inside, Lucius began pacing. She had not seen him pace before. He had not fed. His skin had gone even paler than usual, a faint warning she had learned to read. "Lucius." He stopped. "You look like a sheet of paper someone left in the rain." Despite everything, the smallest exhale, almost a laugh. "Your talent for metaphor continues to be remarkable." "Sit down." He sat. She brought him a glass from the kitchen, watched the color return to him gradually, the way warmth returns to a cold room. "Derek has submitted everything to the Vampire Council," Lucius said finally. "Your debt records, the marriage contract, still images from the footage. He's building a case that we ran a fake marriage scheme to hold the throne. The quarterly meeting has been moved to 1 week from now." The silence that followed had weight, the kind that precedes things. That evening, Arya walked through the rooms alone, touching objects absently, the spine of the handbook, the kitchen counter, the glass Lucius had left by the sink, each one carried history now. The handbook they'd studied at midnight, the kitchen where he'd first drunk openly in front of her, the counter where she'd stood and felt, for the first time in over a year, less alone. She went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the photograph on the nightstand. Her parents, the afternoon sun, her father laughing. She pressed her fingers to the corner of the frame. She had come here for a contract, 1 year, clean, professional, survivable. She had told herself she could perform devotion and walk away intact, the way actors walk off a set. She had been so completely wrong. She found Lucius at the window that night, the mountains beyond the glass, dark and vast. "I'm more afraid of losing you," he said, "to the window, to the dark, than losing the throne." The words landed like something he had not meant to say aloud. 300 years. His voice was steady, controlled, but she could hear the thing beneath it, the way you can hear water moving under ice. I watched everything I was given eventually end. My father, the world I understood. I stopped allowing things to matter, because mattering is just the beginning of loss. She crossed the room, stood beside him. "And then," he said, "you walked through that door with 2 suitcases and a photograph, and a complete inability to pretend that everything was fine, and something in me that I believed was permanently finished began, against my considerable wishes, to start again." She reached for his hand. He let her take it, cold, always cold, but curling around hers in a way that was anything but. "I'm here for you," she said. "Not for the money, not for the contract, for you." He turned to look at her, and she saw it fully, the 300 years of it, the loneliness that immortality had made vast, the grief that time had stretched rather than softened. And beneath all of it, new and frightened of itself, something that looked like hope. His eyes filled slowly. The tears were dark, not like ordinary tears, something drawn from deep within. He turned away the instant he felt them. "Don't apologize," she said before he could. She stepped forward and held him, her arms around someone who had spent 3 centuries learning not to need holding. He did not pull away. For a long time they stood in the dark, with 1 week until everything fell apart. Arya thought, with sudden cold clarity, about the book, the page with the dried black feather, the translated passage she had been carrying for 4 months. "Lucius," she began, "there's something I found in the library about the curse, about what happens when the bond becomes real." His phone sounded. He read the message, his expression closed like a door. 1 week, he said quietly. Derek moved the meeting up to 1 week. The photograph caught the edge of her vision from the nightstand, her father's arm around her mother's shoulder, both of them laughing. She had spent her whole life watching love get taken away before she was ready. And in that moment, she realized the terrible truth. She was not afraid of the council, or Derek, or the words in that ancient book. She was afraid she had finally found something worth keeping, and that it was already too late. When everything is on the line, love, truth, and a throne that hangs in the balance, what does a woman do? She stands up. Stay with us. The Vampire Council met in a room built to make you feel small. Bright stone walls, high ceilings carved with the names of ruling lords going back 6 centuries, 12 elder vampires seated in a half circle, their eyes the collective red of old wine, their faces carrying the particular stillness of people who had watched enough centuries pass to find most things unremarkable. Arya sat beside Lucius at a long obsidian table, kept her hands folded, kept her breathing even. "You've poured drinks for scarier people than this," she told herself. She was not entirely sure that was true. Derek stood at the front of the chamber with the practiced ease of a man who had been preparing for this moment for years. His false smile had been retired for the occasion, replaced by something that looked, on the surface, like reluctant duty. "Brothers and sisters of the old blood," he began, "I come before you today, not with pleasure, but with obligation." He laid the documents on the table, Arya's debt records, the marriage contract, bookmarked and paginated, still images from the hidden camera, printed large and stripped of context, an argument arranged to look inevitable. "The contract before you was signed less than a year ago. The woman at my brother's side was paid to be his wife for 1 year. To perform the role, maintain appearances, and collect payment at the end. The images confirm proximity arranged for an audience. There is no authentic bond. There is a transaction. And a transaction cannot fulfill the conditions of our father's trust-bound curse." Gasps moved through the chamber. Derek looked directly at Arya. His smile returned, thin and precise. Even their intimacy was part of the fake marriage arrangement. The room turned to Lucius. Lucius stood. Arya's breath caught, because she did not know what he would say, whether he would construct the careful defense she had assumed he was preparing, whether he would reach for the diplomatic version of the truth that preserved the most and sacrificed the least. He did neither. "Yes," he said, "it began as a contract." The silence in the chamber was absolute. "I designed it to protect the throne from my brother's ambition. Arya Bennett signed it because she was desperate and honest, and the only person in that building who looked at me like I was worth speaking to rather than fearing." He did not look at Derek. He looked at the council elders, one by one, unhurried. "A transaction cannot fulfill the curse. You are correct about that. You are incorrect that this is still a transaction. What it became is my own business, but I will not stand in this chamber and pretend it is less than it is to make your verdict easier." He sat down. Then Arya stood. She had not planned to. She became aware she was on her feet, the way you become aware you are already moving, too late to reconsider. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. She thought of the photograph on her nightstand, her parents on the back porch, the afternoon sun, her father laughing, the things she had said that she couldn't remember anymore, and the understanding that what mattered was never the exact words. What mattered was that she had said something, and he had laughed, and the world had been whole. She thought of signing the contract, the pen, the cold when she grazed his hand. She thought of the kitchen at 2 in the morning. It just makes you seem more real. She thought of the fireplace. You're not carrying it alone right now? She thought of the dark tears she had watched move down his face, slow and completely, devastatingly real. My name is Aria Bennett. I'm 25 years old. I'm from Texas. My father died 14 months ago and left behind $52,000 in debt. And I came to this city chasing a fresh start that kept not arriving. Her voice held steady. She was faintly surprised. I signed a contract because I was desperate. That is true. And if you want to hold desperation against someone, I understand. This is clearly a room that values composure. Something shifted in the posture of one elder near the end of the row. What I can tell you is what I know about the man whose fate you're deciding. He stayed awake 3 nights before the castle gathering, afraid of what his nature might do while I slept. He mourned his father in 300 years of silence, and had never told anyone until the night your council member thought it useful to record. She paused. He cried, his tears were dark, and he turned away so I wouldn't see. And I saw anyway. That was the most honest thing I have ever witnessed in my life. Derek's smile had gone very still. You filmed a lie, Arya said to him directly. You captured the truth. I'm sorry that's inconvenient for your case. She sat down. The chamber was quiet. Then Eleanor Draven stood. She had been seated at the far edge of the observer's gallery. Silver hair, soft robes, 500 years of patience in her posture. The chamber went silent the way it does for people who have earned authority simply by enduring. I knew about the contract from the beginning. Lucius told me. The shock moved through the room visibly. I allowed it because I have watched my son spend 3 centuries becoming a man who no longer believed he was capable of love. Not because he lacked the capacity, but because immortality is very long, and loneliness, given enough time, becomes a kind of identity. She turned toward Derek. Her voice did not change temperature. It simply became more precise. You planted recording devices in a private room. You obtained personal records without consent. You accelerated these proceedings to prevent your brother from having time to respond. She let that settle. I ask this council to consider who among the Draven brothers has spent this past year protecting the peace between our world and the human one, and who has spent it building a case against his own family. The elder at the end of the row cast the first vote, in Lucius's favor. The others followed, until the motion to remove him failed. Derek stood very still at the front of the chamber. What was left beneath his composure now was something older and uglier, the face of a man who had planned for every outcome, except the one where his brother simply told the truth. The council stripped Derek of his seat, suspended his standing within the community, a sanction so rare that several elders visibly hesitated before voting for it. He was escorted from the chamber without ceremony. He did not look at Lucius on the way out. He looked at Arya. She held his gaze until the door closed, In the corridor afterward, Eleanor found her. She took both of Arya's hands, the same gesture as the castle entrance, the same warmth, and said quietly, "You stood when it mattered." Arya thought of her mother, standing in a hospital corridor for 6 hours without sitting down, without crying because someone had to be steady, and she had decided it would be her. "I learned it from someone," Arya said. Lucius appeared beside her. His hand found the small of her back, light, unhurried, the gesture of someone who no longer needed to perform belonging, because the belonging was simply true. Arya looked at him, the white hair and the garnet eyes, and 300 years of carefully maintained composure that had, over the course of 1 year and 1 contract and 1 photograph on a nightstand, slowly and irrevocably come undone. She understood, with a clarity she had not had since the day her father died, exactly what she wanted her life to look like. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she knew what she had to do. She walked into that room to survive. She walked out having chosen something far more than that. Don't miss what comes next. 3 days after the council meeting, Lucius came to find her in the library. She was sitting on the floor, which he had told her, in the early months, was not how one behaved in a 700-year-old room. She had pointed out that the floor was clean enough to eat off of, and he had looked at her with the expression she had since catalogued as, "You are genuinely baffling to me, and I am not entirely displeased by this." She was holding the book, the one with the dried black feather, the one she had been carrying like a stone in her chest for 4 months. She heard him stop in the doorway. "I was going to tell you," she said, without looking up. "The night the meeting was moved up, I'd started to say it, and then the phone. I kept trying to find the right moment, and there was never a right moment." "Arya." She looked up. He crossed the room and sat down beside her, on the floor, without ceremony, as though he had always sat on library floors, and had simply been waiting for someone to do it with. She handed him the book. He read the passage, the translated margin note in its cramped, careful hand. She watched his face while he read. He gave very little away, the way he always had, but she knew how to read the small things now. The slight tightening at the corner of his jaw, the pause before he turned the page that wasn't really about the page. "How long have you known?" he asked. 4 months. "Were you afraid?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes, not of what might happen to me. I was afraid you'd think I stayed because of it, that the bond had created something obligatory rather than—" "Arya. Rather than real, which it is, I genuinely—" "Arya." She stopped. He took her hands in both of his, enclosing them in that familiar cold that no longer felt like cold to her. It had become, somewhere along the way, simply the temperature of someone she loved. "I know why you stayed," he said quietly. "Not because of a curse written in an old book, because you told me, in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, at the castle, in a council chamber where you had every reason to say nothing, and stood anyway." She looked at him, 300 years of accumulated loss, sitting in the lines of a face that appeared 35 and had seen everything. The contract ends in 5 weeks, he said. What I'm about to say has nothing to do with the contract. Okay. I would like you to stay, not as a wife on paper, as the person I want to share the next 300 years of this, of floors and bad metaphors and takeout and all of it, with. That, Arya said, was possibly the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm 300 years old. I've had time to practice. You absolutely have not practiced. That was entirely unrehearsed, and it showed, and it was perfect. He laughed, real and brief, fangs and all. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He went still for exactly 1 second, the way he always did when she surprised him, and then settled. His arm came around her, cold and certain and entirely there. They stayed on the library floor until the light through the glass shifted from gray to deep amber. 2 weeks later, Arya called her mother. She had been calling every Sunday since November. Short calls, careful ones, where she said, "I'm okay and work is fine." Carol Bennett asked pointed questions in the way of mothers who already suspect, and are simply giving you the opportunity to tell them yourself. This Sunday, Arya sat on the front steps and said, "Mom, I met someone." A pause. "The strange one?" Carol asked. What? You mentioned him months ago. You said you met someone strange. I've been waiting. You never said. I was waiting for you to be ready. Down the hall inside, she could hear Lucius in the kitchen, the sound of someone still learning to be useful in a domestic space. He had, 3 days ago, managed to burn water. She had not known that was possible. He had been extremely dignified about it. He's unusual, Arya said. Very old, very quiet. He reminds me a little of Dad, the way Dad listened. The silence on the other end was a different kind. Then I'd like to meet him, Carol said finally, her voice careful. When you're ready. Soon, Arya said. I think soon. After she hung up, she sat a while longer. The mountains were invisible from here, but she could feel them, the way you feel large things in the dark, present, ancient, indifferent to the smallness of individual grief, which was not an insult but a comfort, if you held it right. She thought about her father, not the hospital, not the fluorescent lights, not the bills. The back porch, the afternoon sun, his arm around her mother, the laughing. Something inside her, something clenched tight since the day the hospital called, quietly, finally, let go. She wiped her eyes, stood up, went inside to see what Lucius had done to the kitchen. They sold the underground residence 6 weeks after the contract ended. It had been Arya's idea. She made it carefully, not knowing how he'd receive it. The place was laden with history, with 4 decades of his life. But Lucius had looked at the dark stone and the gray leather and said, I never actually liked it here. You lived here for 40 years. Yes, that's how I know. The house they found was on a quiet street on the eastern edge of the city. 2 floors, a yard that needed work, a porch with a swing that creaked on the left side and was perfect in every other way. It was not grand, it was theirs. The morning they moved in, Arya carried the same 2 suitcases she had brought to the underground residence over a year ago. The old jeans, the laptop, the photograph. She set it on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light hit it directly. Her parents, the back porch, the afternoon sun. Lucius stood in the doorway watching. "Your father looks like someone who knew what he had," he said. "He did. He was very good at knowing." "So are you, better than you think." She turned around. He was leaning in the doorframe, white hair loose. No formality, just a man who happened to be 300 years old, standing in an ordinary kitchen on a quiet street, looking at her like she was the most remarkable thing he had encountered in 3 centuries. Which, he had told her once on a library floor, she was. "Come help me with the boxes," she said. "I'm immortal. I don't do boxes." "You burned water." "That was one time." Lucius. He pushed off the doorframe, fine. And just like that, in the most ordinary moment they had shared. It was real. The house felt different from every place Arya had lived before. Not because of the porch or the creaking swing, because for the first time in a very long time, she was not pretending that everything was fine. Everything actually was. The contract is over. The story isn't. Stay with us for the final chapter, the one that makes everything worth it. There was a question Lucius asked her one evening on the porch. They had been sitting on the swing, the one that creaked on the left side, watching the sky move from gold to rose to the deep blue-gray that comes just before full dark. He was holding a coffee mug she had given him at Christmas. White ceramic, slightly chipped from a shelf incident she had been responsible for, and he had never mentioned again. It was not elegant. He used it every evening. She had a mug too, coffee, real and hot. His had something else mixed in, a detail she had absorbed so completely into daily life that she no longer registered it as unusual. Some truths, once accepted, simply become furniture. "If we could go back," he said, watching the sky, "to the morning you signed the contract, not knowing any of what would follow, would you still sign it?" Arya thought about the pen, the desk, her name on the tab, the cold when she grazed his hand. "I'd sign it faster," she said, "because that was the day the fake marriage started, and the day it started is the day it eventually led me to you." He leaned against her shoulder, the unhurried certain way of someone who has stopped being careful about wanting things. "Terrible arithmetic," he said. "Best I ever did." The swing creaked, the sky went dark, the mountains stood in the distance, enormous and indifferent and entirely beautiful. And she understood, sitting there, that this was what she had been reaching for in all the years before the contract. Not a rescue, not a solution, but this, a porch, and someone to sit on it with, and a quiet, comfortable enough not to need filling. A month after they moved in, Arya set a small glass vial on the kitchen counter one morning. "It's mine, voluntary. It's just a trust thing, a gesture." He picked it up, held it to the light, then he set it on the windowsill, directly beside the photograph of her parents, her father's arm around her mother, both of them laughing in the afternoon sun. He didn't say anything. He reached across the counter and covered her hand with his. The cold of it was warm to her now, the way familiar things become warm simply by being present long enough. He taught her simple magic on a Tuesday. He appeared in the yard with careful concentration and said, "Hold very still. Don't think about falling." That is the worst possible instruction. "Arya, don't think about falling." She didn't think about falling. And then, slowly, impossibly, she rose, just a foot or two. The grass below looked smaller. The porch looked exactly right. The mountains beyond the roofline were vast and real, in the way they only are from up high. Lucius rose beside her, white hair moving in the night wind, watching her face with quiet delight. She laughed, the kind she had spent years keeping small, so it wouldn't take up too much space. It took up the whole yard. The cool night air moved through them both, and somewhere in her chest, the last locked door that grief had closed swung gently, easily, wide. 6 months later, Mia came for dinner. Arya told her almost everything. The contract, the gathering where Derek had gripped her hand too hard, the council chamber, the porch, the floating. She left out the precise details of what Lucius was, which she suspected Mia had already pieced together from the white hair and the chipped mug and the way he went very still when anyone spoke too fast. Mia listened, ate an enormous amount of pasta, set down her fork. "So the mysterious guy is real." "He's real." Mia looked at Lucius, who was washing dishes with the focused dignity of someone who had spent 3 centuries not washing dishes, and was determined not to show it. "I told you," Mia said with great satisfaction, "that it sounded like a vampire horror movie." "You did." "And you signed anyway." "I did." "Good," Mia said simply. "You deserved something that couldn't be explained." And she finally understood. Not as a lesson delivered, not as a conclusion reached, but as something quieter and more lasting than either. The contract had never been the beginning. The beginning was the photograph on the nightstand, her parents on the back porch, laughing at something she could no longer remember, and the slow, hard-won understanding that the words never mattered. What mattered was that she had said something, and someone had laughed, and for that one moment, everything had been whole. She had spent 14 months afraid that love was something that got taken away. What she had learned in a room beneath a city, at a council table, on a library floor, on a creaking porch swing in the dark, was that love is not taken. It is built slowly, with cold hands and bad metaphors and burned water and one chipped mug placed on a windowsill beside a photograph. It is built in the moments when pretending stops. And once it is truly built, on honesty and chosen vulnerability and the courage to stay when staying costs something. It does not go. It simply becomes the temperature of home. This story is for anyone who has ever poured a second cup of coffee out of habit, before remembering there is only one cup needed now. Anyone who walks past a bedroom door that still feels like it belongs to someone else. Anyone carrying a weight so ordinary. Grief, debt, exhaustion. The particular loneliness of a quiet house, that the world didn't notice it, even as it bent you. This story reminds us that love rarely arrives in the form we imagined. It comes sideways. Through a door we walked past 1,000 times. Through a person who unsettles everything we thought we knew about what we deserved. Through a year we thought we were simply surviving. And it asks only one thing of us, to stop performing fine. Not all at once, not dramatically, just one honest moment with one person, at a kitchen counter, or on a porch, or over a cup of coffee that's gone slightly cold. If there is someone in your life, a grandchild who calls on Sundays, a neighbor who knocks without calling first, a friend who still says your loved one's name out loud when others have quietly stopped, let them sit with you this week, not to fix anything, just to sit. Set out the good cups, the ones you've been saving. That is enough. That has always been enough. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations depicted are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.